You should come to Kirkwall because it's the best place in Orkney.
Everybody knows you, very friendly.
The wonderful fresh air, the wildlife, the archaeology, the stories.
The diving, anything you want is here.
We've got a bright red cathedral built by Vikings. How cool can you get? And if Kirkwall was a 3-course meal, it would be Orkney herring.
For main course, it would have to be the seaweed-eating sheep, North Ronaldsay lamb, and then for pudding, Orkney fudge cheesecake.
Mark Steele's in town.
Thanks very, very much. Good evening and welcome to Mark Steele's in Town, which this week comes from the Kirkwall centre of Kirkwall in Orkney, in the North Sea, where you get the biggest cheer ever of your life when you go on stage, not because they think you're any good, but for having got here. I bet there are reviews of shows here that go 5 stars for a fantastic performance. He made it here. Better than last year's effort when he gave up at Scrabster and went home. Because you are north of Scotland. Now, I know you're aware of that, but for everybody else in Britain, that is an amazing thing. Not that you're in the north of Scotland, you are north of Scotland, past Scotland. I just love the idea that there is a place where the directions to get there are, you go to John O'Groats and then... When you read about these people who walk or cycle from Land's End to John O'Groats, you must think, lazy bastards, they never got here. The night I got here, I noticed that when you get here, they don't say, did you have a nice journey? They say, so you made it then? It is exciting. I mean, first you have to go hundreds of miles through all those bits of Scotland where you didn't think there was anything really there. It's just sort of the pages on a road map that you never use. And then you get to Thurso, and that's a place where you think, oh, I'm not sure I trust it here. You think if I ask someone, how do I get the ferry from Scrabster to Orkney, they'll go, ferry? But this is Christmas Eve, 1929. But then it's brilliant, then the ferry, because it's not just like the Channel ferry, the wind is just howling and rain coming in from all directions, and you feel naughty. You feel like a kid, you feel like, oh, I'm not supposed to be this far. After a while, you feel like keeping a diary. It was the 6th day and we hadn't eaten since the turn-off to Wick. Battling against the storm as we crossed the Pentland Firth, I tied myself to the mast and hallucinated that I was back by a roaring fire at base camp in Inverness. And it's not just the journey that puts people off from coming. I'm sure the Orkney scholar Hugh Marwick, who wrote a number of heavyweight academic works about the area, said, the climate of Orkney is the vilest under heaven. And I get the impression that you like it like that. But the slogan for the Orkney Tourist Board should be, if Hurricane Katrina came through here, we'd say it was mild for the time of year. The most pointless career in the world, I would think, must be to be a hairstylist in Orkney. Imagine paying 50 quid. There we are, I've done a lovely delicate bounce and a wonderful bob that should be light and floaty. Out the door, force 10 gale. Yeah, like a tramp like everyone else. Something that is fascinating, I'm sure not everybody will appreciate, is there's not a sense of Scottish nationalism here at all. If anything, you're Orkney nationalist. And the roots of Orkney are Norwegian, the names, the accent, the history Norwegian. You're twinned with Hordaland. When Scott and Amundsen were racing to the South Pole, I wonder what side you were on. You were probably cheering, one road, Amundsen! And taunting Scott. He's tired, he's lost, his toes fell off from frost. But one consequence of this background is, as you seem to remember fondly, one of the Norwegian earls that ruled Orkney in medieval times, who was called Thorfinn the Skull Splitter. And now, according to my book, Who Was Who in Orkney, it says, under Thorfinn the Skull Splitter, little detail of his rule is known, although his nickname suggests it may have been violent. Nothing gets past that right, now, does it? Orkney's version of Moose. But whereas most places might think, oh, I think we'd better draw a veil over that chap, here, you love him. There's a beer called Skull Splitter, named after Thorfinn in his memory, and it does, I can testify, live up to his name. It is so strong that the Portman Group that regulates drinking guidelines have insisted that it shouldn't be classified as a beer, to which I hope the reply was, oh, if only there was some sort of warning we could give people that a beer called Skull Splitter might be on the strong side. It's called Skull Splitter! Do you think anybody's going to buy Skull Splitter and go, oh, I was hoping it was mostly lime? I was amazed by the story of the Norse settlers, because I assumed that there were Picts here originally and then the Vikings invaded. But it's not quite as simple as that, because the Vikings came and settled here quite happily, and then they used Orkney as a base from which to attack Norway. So your ancestors must have been known as nutters even amongst the Vikings. Ordinary Vikings would go, don't go near the Orkney Vikings, they're mental. Now, Kirkwall is, of course, the capital of Orkney, and I think it's fair to say it isn't quite as big as some other capital cities. I started at one end when I got here, and I walked for about 3 minutes by the harbour, and I thought, oh, I'm probably coming to the busy part now. And in fact, then there was a farm, and I was out the other end. And this was at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and there was nobody on the road at all. Thought you must have brilliant traffic reports on Radio Orkney. Terrible rush hour hauled up this morning, a van and a bicycle. The crime rate here, I'm told, is one of the lowest in Britain. Nobody seems to get angry about anything much. Maybe in the 12th century you got it all out of your system, I don't know. But there's one thing that does make people cross, which is Stromness. Stromness, the little place where you come in, it's as if you're thinking, how dare there be another place within 100 miles big enough to have its own co-op? I think the nature of Kirkwall can be seen by the fact that you have road signs here that say Otters Crossing. I have to inform you that in London we don't really have that sign much. We do, to be fair to us, we do have our own quaint little signs that are similar, but instead of saying that, they say, did you witness the fatal stabbing? Now, my favourite shop here is the one that in the window has prams, and for... and to anybody normal, therefore you would think it must be a pram shop. But it is in fact an off-licence. So you walk past the teddies and the baby baths, and the place is packed with alcohol, like more than a normal off-licence would be. It's amazing, like people must go in there and go, the baby's due soon, we'll need a pram and a bottle of rum. Something else that's peculiar here, you're famous for having hardly any trees, of course, which really isn't quite true. There's some trees out the back of the theatre, I've noticed, but maybe you don't see them, I don't know. I mean, I keep expecting someone to go, oh, so they're trees. We should clear up one mistake that frustrates you about outsiders here, a mistake that lots of people make when they say, what's it like living in the Orkneys? So, does someone want to tell me what's wrong with that? Is indeed Orkney. Orkney is a plural already, meaning all of the islands. There's some debate about how many islands there are altogether, but there's 13, I think, inhabited islands. Kirkwall's on the biggest one, which is known as the mainland. I love the fact that this is the mainland and you don't even consider Scotland. That's not... Must be people in Orkney who goes, some people do speak of a kingdom far away and across the sea. Of a land known of the Highlands where folk are so tightly packed they have barely a mountain each. But what must it be like living on the other islands in Orkney, like Eday, that has a population of 121? There's two of you. There's only 119 left. But beautiful though all of this is, I can't help wondering whether at one point you missed out a little bit up here, Orkney, because here you are in the North Sea, a sea which has been noted over the last 50 years for being full of oil. But according to your local paper, Orkney is the most expensive place in Britain to fill up your car. How have you managed that? You're surrounded by this stuff. You must have done a really, really bad deal with the oil companies. Like some naive young band signing up with a record company. I mean, after you signed the contract, somebody came back and went, great news! All we've got to do is let them drill wherever they like and they'll give us £50. But I love that you could be as eccentric as you like up here. No one's really going to stop you at all, are they? No one's going to come and tell you off. For example, the Kirkwall Library and Archive has a website, and this is what it says about its aims. Our aims are to promote interest in local culture and history. Our slogan will be something like, stop doing that crack and heroin, read a book instead. I can't believe that no one has thought of it already. How is it that that hasn't been adopted by every other library? Is this what goes on in Kirkwall Library? Did you enjoy the Catherine Cookson, Mrs. Sinclair? Oh, I'm afraid I didn't finish it, dear. I'm afraid I'm back on the crack again. What a shame. There does seem to be a tradition here of being off your head in rather strange ways. I suppose shouldn't be surprising in a place that's proud of Skull Splitter. On the historical website Orkney Jar, it tells us, following an Orcadian birth, a bottle of whiskey was brought out and hastily consumed by the father and menfolk of the area. Whiskey was immediately fed to the baby with a teaspoon. That explains that shop. I bet the antenatal classes are fun here, though, aren't they? Very important, when the baby's born, don't let him smoke for at least 2 hours. And there's still a thing called Udal law up here, which was established by the Norwegians, that stated that an Udala should take up arms for the Norwegian king, if asked. But according to the Orkney Jar website, there has been some concern in the Northern Isles recently that the traditional rights afforded to people in Orkney and Shetland under the ancient Norse system of Udal law will be scrapped. You don't like to be rushed into change, do you? This sounds like the sort of law that was scrapped everywhere else in about 1258. God knows how you'll cope with really modern legislation, like not having witch trials. So then you were ruled by these magnificent sounding characters. Torfin the Skull Splitter we know about, but before him there was Sigurd the Mighty, grandson of Kettle the Flat Nose, and with Torstein the Red, they fought a Pict called Tusk, who got his name from a huge protruding tooth, and Sigurd cut off Tusk's head and brought it back on his horse, but on the way home the tooth of the decapitated head pierced his leg, and so he died from blood poisoning. Just another normal Orkney Viking. Some of these characters are honoured in St Magnus Cathedral, the huge building that dominates the town, and to be honest is far too big for what you need. St Magnus himself is in there, and you could see the family lines of earls. One of them was called Olaf the Quiet, and I thought, well, he can't have been much of a Viking, can he? Let's go and plunder. What? What's that, Olaf? Plunder. What? I can't catch you! But then Tom Muir, the wonderful local historian who showed me round, he said, well, that name may have been ironic. Oh, that's going to make things really confusing now. If they're doing irony with these names, like if historians in the future come across someone called Ian Paisley the Softly Spoken. Now, the brilliant thing is that most of this is known because of the Icelandic sagas, which have a branch of sagas, especially about Orkney. At this point, I'd like to speak to Tom Muir, who I mentioned just now, who's a historian of the area. And where I was so impressed with your connection with the sagas is that you've actually written them on a pub wall.
Well, you know, doesn't everybody?
And you've made a little bit of a confession, though, earlier, that I think you should enlighten the good people of Kirkwall with.
Yeah, that is a wee homage to Joy Division in one of the one of the poems.
Sigurd the Mighty strode back from his horse, the severed head in his hand, and said, "It'll be love that tears us apart."
Answers on a postcard, please, if you know the one.
Thanks very much to Tom for that. Orkney stayed Norwegian until the 1460s, apparently, when Scotland and Norway did a deal that became known as the Pawning of the Islands. And you were pawned, like a junkie's wedding ring. And, maybe there were even adverts. Send us your islands for cash. Just pop in an envelope and cash, cash, cash. Now, in most areas of Britain, the history that dominates the landscape, if you like, is the Reformation or the Industrial Revolution. Here you're surrounded by the Middle Ages instead, and yeah, maybe that's because there's a few people here who don't accept that they're over yet, but but also, of course, there's the archaeology. Everywhere you go, there's like stones and circles and roped off patches of an ancient city somewhere. But there's a certain sort of tourist, I think, that you attract up here. You can't get very many that just come up here and want to go sunbathing or clubbing. Or the clubbing, you'd be funny to get some of the clubbers up here who'd think, oh yeah, it's an island, it's bound to be like Ibiza. That'd be brilliant. You could have adverts. Check out the Fusion Bar light. Happening beats pumping out all through the night. The sound's going to keep going to 9:30 p.m. So instead you get bird watchers and walkers and people like the German whose blog I found, who came here, and he complained that there weren't enough buses. He says, then there was one bus that went right round the whole island. This would have been perfect, but senselessly it didn't come back again. I'd come all this way to see that German. Stood where he started going, but how do I get back? So fantastic. There are fantastic tourist attractions here as well. The Highland Park Whisky Distillery. And much as I do appreciate your local malt whisky, there is a review of the Highland Park 2000 in classic malt whisky that goes citrusy, dried fruit nose with spicy oaky smoke, laced with creamy sherried vanilla, intensifying with hints of licorice and nutty almonds, with palate of light smoke and peat carrying fresh vanilla, lemon and orange, fresh and luscious, with oaky sherried hints and rich chocolate. I'll tell you what it tastes of, bloody whiskey, you ponch! Orkney probably reached its most prominent time in the modern era during each of the World Wars. Thousands of troops were stationed here for the First World War because of the strategic importance of the Scapa Flow, the bit of sea that's a sort of natural harbour that starts at the bottom of mainland. But the troops weren't altogether thankful for being sent here. And a German prisoner of war, after the armistice in 1918, wrote a letter to a newspaper in Hamburg that said, "If the English have stood living there for 4 years, they deserve to have won the war." So, in the Second World War, when there were about 60,000 troops stationed here, the army made it a priority to keep them entertained. And a theatre was set up in Kirkwall, and Gracie Fields came here, and Yehudi Menuhin, Vera Lynn, George Formby. And altogether, the troops here loved Orkney so much that in 1943 they even wrote a poem about it, for the Second World War, that they'd recite regularly, which they called the Orkney Blast, that started, "This bloody town's a bloody cuss, no bloody trains, no bloody bus, and no one cares for bloody us in bloody Orkney." Now, immediately, of course, there was one reply to this that went, "I think this is not accurate, as there is a bus, but it does go round and round." And it ends, "Best bloody place is bloody bed with bloody ice on bloody head. You might as well be bloody dead in bloody Orkney." So, really, then, you should be proud of Orkney's contribution to the war effort. Because of you, when the order came to storm the beaches of Normandy, leading to almost certain death, all the soldiers here went, "Oh, thank God for that." But your most impressive effort at proving that you are spectacularly off-centre in Orkney, in a uniquely Viking way, is through your magnificent sport, the Kirkwall Bar. The bar is a specially made ball, and to start with, the process of team selection in this sport is fascinating. It's played every year on Christmas Day and New Year's Day between uppies and doonies. And if you're born between the Mercat Cross and the shore, then you're a doonie, and if you're not, then you're an uppie. And then the bar, made from cork and leather, is thrown up at the cross in the centre of the town, and all the men of the island try to get hold of it. Now, the doonies have to get it in the harbour, and the uppies have to get it in a goal uptown. And that is all the rules there is. There's none of this match of the day, let's have a look at this penalty shout again. Did he make contact? Instead, the panel would go, and if we look at this incident again, we can see it's a perfectly fair swing of the axe. A reporter from a newspaper in Ohio described it as, "Once thrown, the bar seemed to disappear into the swirling, pushing, steaming, kicking, groaning mass of humanity in which the male population of Kirkwall is knitted into a giant knot. In the eye of the storm, the fighting is merciless." Whereas the local book, the Kirkwall Bar, which I have there, says, "From time to time, tempers become inflamed and fists fly. But in the main, good humour prevails. When a man is injured, the pack can usually be persuaded to ease back. I wonder what counts as injured. Is this skull split? Only a bit. Carry on." I just love the way that it's all seen as a laugh. The Kirkwall Bar says there is an amusing story of how, during a tough game, a battered and dishevelled player lurched up to an innocent bystander and smote him a resounding blow on the ear. That's an amusing story. There was a game in 1951 where the bar went into the PDC, which was icebound, so the players all piled in after it, but the ice broke, so they carried on. But some players cut their legs open on the ice, and according to the book, they were stitched in the surgery, but so cold were the players' limbs, no anaesthetic was required. There's an account of the game in 1998, and it's written by a journalist in Scotland on Sunday, and it describes the Up His Team talk. And he says, there was a hushed silence as the captain gave his tactical analysis. Look, he implored, I don't want to see any of you sneaking off during the game. And if you're going to have a fag, have it in a place that can do some damage. I think Alf Ramsey used to say much the same thing. I wish this was on the telly. What a good game this lad had. Excellent use of the fag all afternoon. Well, I think it's a brilliant game. There is a sort of a strategy that I found fascinating, which is this thing of smuggling, where one team sneaks the ball away without anybody seeing it and gets it towards their goal while everybody else is just carrying on fighting, looking for what they think is the ball at the bottom of this huge melee of people. It does seem that there was one year where someone even got in a car with the bar, drove it to the goal and scored, and then went and sat in the pub while everybody else was still thumping each other. That's a class game. Oh, please get it in the Olympics. And there have been special women's bar events in the past, and a boys' bar, and I should think there's a newborn babies' bar. Struggling with your cord? I think there's an advantage, one big advantage of being this far from any big city, which is that you must feel more comfortable about being different. I think you don't have to be normal. You can play nutty games that would be banned if they were in Edinburgh. There's hardly anything to do, but you can at least be weird while you're doing it. There's something. And I can see why it captivates people, and it is unexpectedly lively here when you get here, I think. There's music festivals and a sense of community, and much more going on than I think most people would imagine. A brilliant record shop that I love. The cafes are packed. And in a way, I think it's fitting that Orkney should be the last destination in this particular series, because the corporate world has made very little impact, I think, in spoiling your identity, probably because it can't put 3 weeks aside to get here. But also because I can honestly say, and I can really mean this, of all the places I've been to in this series, this is definitely the most northerly. There's no... But also it's this intriguing mix of old and new. You can still sort of feel the Viking history all around. But also Orkney now is the centre of wind and wave power, with these huge barrages and the wind turbines. And there's a sense that here is a place with a past and a future, really, providing this energy for a new age. And then in Orkney you'll walk into a shop and you'll ask for a bag of wind and they'll say, that'll be £50. For some reason, wind's more expensive here than anywhere else in the world. Thanks very much.
Mark Steele's In Town was written and performed by Mark Steele with additional material by Pete Sinclair. The producer was Julia Mackenzie.